Welcome to Aspects of Writing with your host, James Kelly. For the next 60 minutes, we'll explore every aspect of writing, including how to create, format, and even sell your work. The phone lines are open at 731-1230. That's 731-1230. Or toll free, 1-866-820-KLAV. Now, let's get writing. Here's your host, James Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, here on KLAV 1230 on the AM dial. And on your computer, you can listen to this broadcast at www.klav1230am.com. You can view us live on YouTube at youtube.com/Aspects of Writing, and that's all one word. Just click on the featured button. The toll-free number to call in for the show if you have questions or comments is 1-866-820-5528. If you're local, you can dial 731-1230. The topic of our show today is finding the right editor. My guest for the show is Dana Michelli and B.J. Rudell. We also have Janet Corsi in the studio with us. And before we get started, we're going to go into mentoring Jan. Jan is someone that we're taking from beginning to end with her novel. She wrote it. We're going to help her through the editing process, getting it funded, all the way through getting a PR person and getting it on the internet for sale. So Dana Michelli is on the phone with us with Writers in the Sky, who's going to update us on the editing process. Dana, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, how are you?
Great. How you doing, Dana?
Good, good. Hi, Jan.
Hi there.
The editing's going very well. I'm about, I am 2/3 of the way through the book. And now I'm looking at things like consistency in the story, the balance between narrative and dialogue, those sorts of things. And then, of course, moving into the end, which I always think is the most important part of the book, just making sure everything comes together, neatly, but also leaves things unanswered because Jan has sequels planned.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's going very well. I'm very much enjoying working on it and
Well,
working with you guys.
We were talking today, Jan and I were talking about how this process actually does help her when it comes to the sequels. She says she's learning a great deal from what you're doing. Is that correct, Jan?
Oh, good. That's so good to hear.
I cannot wait to start re-editing book number 2 so that when you get it, you're going to go, oh, I taught her something. Because you're fabulous. As a matter of fact, I was telling James, these are my narratives for you. Creative, resourceful, initiative, productive, imagination, original, strong, brilliant, intense, convincing, effective, anticipates, expects, and delivers. So basically, you're just passionate.
In other words, she has nothing good to say.
I'm going to keep the recording of this, and when I'm not in a good mood, I'm just going to play that over and over again.
Or just call me.
I will.
All right, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, here on KLAV 1230 on the AM dial. And again, on the computer, you can listen to us at klav1230am.com. You can also watch us live at youtube.com/Aspects of Writing. Just click the featured button. My guests today are Dana Michelli and B.J. Rudell. B.J., are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I was interested by what Jen said. You talked about the end as the most important part. Do you go into the writing where you have everything mapped out, or is there some mystery still in terms of how that ending's going to come together?
Well, this particular book has got multiple endings, so it's going to have multiple books to go with it. The Secrets of Time has many secrets, and they're not all found at the same time.
Yeah. Tell the listeners the premise of the book.
The book is basically, it's about a woman who's in her 50s, her husband has passed away, and she makes some errors in her life after he passes. And during her process of trying to get a grips with her life, she finds a bunch of letters in her old grandfather clock that's been passed down from generation to generation. And these letters are letters from people in the past that have also made errors in their life. And so from these letters, multiple stories are happening.
Well, what's interesting about the story is that all the letters aren't all found at the same time. There's hidden compartments within the clock.
Right.
And at different times throughout the story, a secret's revealed.
Right. In the first book, probably 17 stories are found. In the second book, there's going to be many, many more. Many secrets. Many people have had this clock in their lifetime.
Well, yeah. BJ, do you have any other questions for Jan?
No, it sounds fascinating. It sounds like a lot of complexity, and obviously that's the challenge and the joy of writing, is trying to make something with a lot of different moving parts, come together in a seamless fashion. And it's remarkable what you've done so far with it.
Well, I'm hoping to get a point across with the first book for people to look at life a little differently than the way they do look, to open up their hearts as well as their minds and their eyes. And from that, these other stories will then make even more sense to them.
Well, one of the things I'd like to let the listeners know as well is that you have a funding site set up for this book through authr.com, and that's AUTHR.com. And they just go there and they put in
The Secrets of Time
by
Janet Corsi.
And
please donate, contribute. Feel free to sign up for as many books as you like.
So, Dana, what can we expect for the next Mentoring Jan session?
Basically, by then I will have completed the first round of edits, and Jen will have the whole manuscript to go through, and then I'll be, working with her on her changes. Like if she has questions or concerns or wants to keep something in, we could talk about it. Because Jen and I spoke on the phone the other day, and I said, "This is your baby. This is my suggestions, but you're by no means think it, you're bound in any way to accept it. And I want to hear, no, I don't want that, so then we can work on it and collaborate. And when, two heads are better than one.
Yeah.
So
that was a point that James and I were talking about earlier too. It is so nice to have a fresh set of eyes on this, because your eyes are seeing things that my heart wanted to say as well. So a lot of the things that you are interjecting into the book are things that I really would like to have said, but didn't know how. So this is really wonderful.
Well, we're going to skip
it. Just so close to it,
That's it. And I'm also seeing ahead of what I'm writing, because I already know what I want to write. So it's what's happening next, so I don't get everything in that I'd like to have said.
Mm-hmm. And BJ, you had something to say?
Yeah, that's a great approach to writing, is being willing to have someone read it and share it and give their advice on how to improve upon it. Because it's true. I mean, you can be the best writer in the world, and you're still going to benefit from the input of those that you trust. And when I wrote and when I write, I look to my wife and I look to a couple of close friends who know how to write. And I think I think really successful writers are willing to give up all of their control over something, because the sum of inputs from other people, it often leads to a better result than just the more narrow focus of one writer.
That's probably the most difficult thing for an author to do, is to turn over everything to someone else to say, this is what you need to do. Because most authors, they aren't necessarily, well, they do have an ego.
Yes, we do.
They don't want to hear that this isn't right, or perhaps you should have done this, or what if you did this instead, and because they think this is perfect. So it is really difficult. Usually, I think most people have a misconception of what an editor is. A lot of people, there are many types of editing, but most people think of it as just doing correcting the syntax or grammatical errors. But true editing is much more than that, as Jan can attest to.
Yes, and Dana is doing a marvelous job on this. And we were talking earlier, and I said, this reminds me of what some of your editing on this second half of what Judy McFadden said with, you might have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. And so I'm ready.
So a little bit of the baby went out with the bathwater on yours? Is that what you're
baby
saying?
went with the bathwater, because I'm really liking the suggestions and the movement that the book's
good.
taking.
I was worried when I was like, oh no, I hope she's not going to be mad at me.
Dana, she praises you every time I talk to her. That's all I hear. I'm getting tired of hearing all those things she read.
And that's only the short list.
That's so funny.
No, that's fantastic. We're going to move on here to fun facts and quotes. And you know what? BJ, I'm going to let you read the first one, because I happen to know you used to be a comedian. So
Good, okay. Give me 1 second. I apologize.
No problem.
to pull it up. The first one is, I suppose some editors are failed writers, but then so are most writers. And that's from T.S. Eliot.
That's so true. All right, Jan, would you like to read the second one?
Yes. Remember the waterfront shack with the sign, "Fresh fish sold here"? Of course it's fresh. We're at the ocean. Of course it's for sale. We're not giving it away. Of course it's here. Otherwise the sign would be someplace else. The final sign, fish. That was a quote from Peggy Noonan.
All right. And Dana, would you like to read number 3?
Sure. This is from Edward Blishen. I've never heard of him. The work was like peeling an onion, the outer skin off with difficulty, but in no time, onto its innards, tears streaming from your eyes as more and more beautiful reductions become possible.
Okay.
I love that.
And I'm going to read the final quote. Here are some fun facts about publishing from Romalda Publishing. Large press publisher, and these are just fun facts about publishing. Large press publisher HarperCollins will publish on average 1,200 books a year. That's amazing. That's more than 3 books each day of the year. A larger publisher on average must sell 10,000 books to break even, whereas a small press may only need to sell half that. The average traditional publishing book sells less than 99 copies.
Wow.
If you include self-published books in the total, the average book sells less than 11 copies. A book is considered a success by a large press when it sells 5,000 copies. You will almost always be given a second book deal if you sell more than 7,500 copies. These numbers tend to be smaller with small presses. Only 3% of books sell more than 1,000 copies. Only 1% of books sell more than 5,000 copies. Most initial print runs are 5,000. And, that's been the standard for a long time. Even when I started in publishing, the most you would print for a first edition was usually 5,000. Does anyone have a comment on that?
I'm not going there.
Just seems like awfully low numbers. I'm surprised.
Well, if you have a major publisher who's doing a major campaign and you're out on the road and they have to send books to every bookstore, that probably is going to be a little bit bigger than that. But then think about it. If they're only sending 20 books to each store, 5,000 might be all they need anyway. For an independent publisher who's publishing their own work, to publish 5,000 books would almost be foolish unless you know for certain you have those sold in advance.
Right.
And with today's publishing the way it is, with print on demand, you wouldn't need to do that anyway.
Right.
So, yeah. If you are just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, here on KLAV 1230 on the AM dial and on your computer, www.klav1230am.com. My guest for today is Dana Michelle and BJ Rudell, and then we have Janet Corsi here in the studio. And we have a guest who hasn't been with us for a while on the line, and that's Kevin Parsons. Kevin is on the road. He's been on the road for at least 3 months now, or 4. And he's going to 50 states in 50 weeks. So he's going to update us, if you don't mind. All right, Kevin, are you there?
Hello, James. I'm here.
Hi, how have you been?
Great. Actually, it's been 6 months. Just past 6 months now.
Wow.
Yeah, we are on the East Coast. We're in Delaware.
Okay.
And so it's been a great time. We really had fun. It's getting colder, of course. And something really interesting happened last week.
Okay.
The week before last, my daughter, a month ago, my daughter gave birth to twins.
Oh,
So-
congratulations.
So we,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. So we put the trip on hold. We left the bike in Newark, New Jersey,
Okay.
and we flew to San Diego. While we were there, Hurricane Sandy hit,
Ah.
and so I didn't know how the bike was. We called the motel where we left it. There's no answer. So we flew back this last Friday night,
Mm-hmm.
and we couldn't get a shuttle. So we rode in a cab, and it was like going through a war zone.
Wow.
I mean, there was police at every intersection where the lights were out, and there's power poles down, and pulled into the motel, and the cab dropped us off, and I looked, and it's dark. It's got no power.
Oh.
Was your
And
bike
the
there?
bike it was inside a courtyard, and so I didn't know. So we found the motel operator. He was still there, and he moved a van out of the way. We walked into the back, and there in the courtyard, all by itself, the whole place is dark. There's the bike and the trailer, and the
Wow. That's amazing in itself.
It was. I mean, I felt like it was almost like the hand of God.
Well,
Just watched over that bike because I didn't think of a hurricane when we left, and we would have left it in any parking lot.
mm-hmm.
But this one was a courtyard with two-story building on all four sides of it. You went kind of through the building to get into it. Very unusual.
This bike is just not an ordinary bike. You want to tell the listeners a little bit about your bike?
Right. It's a Honda Goldwing, and I had it wrapped. It's red, white, and blue. It's Stars and Stripes theme. And then we pull a trailer. It's called a Trailmaster trailer. That's the brand. And it folds out into a king-size bed and a 7x7 tent. And then there's storage underneath it.
It's a huge bike.
It's a big bike. It's got an 1,800cc engine, which is bigger than a lot of mini cars.
So how is your trip? I'm just curious. Has it been a fun trip for you?
Really been fun. And, you're supposed to show, not tell. And I guess it really shows when we're talking about taking longer than 50 weeks.
Yeah.
We got to get down to Florida, and then we're going to kind of sit out for a few weeks and let winter get a little bit ahead of us, because Oklahoma in February, it just sounds like ice storms,
No.
So,
not Oklahoma. That's where I'm from.
Yeah. So you know about that, right?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. So it may be more like 55, maybe 60 weeks. So we're not chomping at the bit to get home. So
Well, we're going to get back into the show, Kevin, but will you keep us updated when you have a chance?
Sure.
All right.
And then just it's www.50statesin50weeks.com.
Okay.
The number's 50.
All right.
And we'll stay in touch.
All right, and just put a blog on our Facebook page.
I will.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
My first guest is going to be B.J. Rudell, and B.J.'s career has included stints as a congressional aide, a high school civics teacher, a writer, an editor, a consultant, and an improv comedic performer. His first book, Only in New Hampshire, garnered national acclaim, through which he earned a Writer on the Rise honors from the Campaigns and Elections magazine, and for which he garnered more than 40 media appearances, including CNN and Fox News. B.J., can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career?
Sure. I appreciate being on the show, James, and everyone.
Thank you.
My writing experience, my brother is a writer, and I grew up in a family where writing was something to value, and editing, and I wrote things as a kid that my older brother would critique, even though I was a kid, and the standards were very high. And my first book, Only in New Hampshire, was based on, of all things, on this day, a presidential campaign, an experience that I had. And it was something, Jan, I don't know if you feel this way with your book, but it was something that I just felt swept away into writing it. It really was something that I felt the need to get down on paper.
It was our last. It was the last campaign. It was the last presidential campaign that actually spearheaded this book that I just wrote.
No kidding.
And no kidding.
Well, it's meant to be that we're on this show together. Then.
That's it.
There's something about politics then that brings people together. But for me, writing is something that's very therapeutic. It's very enjoyable, and when it isn't, I don't do it. And everyone is different. I know my brother will sit down and dutifully write pages and pages, and there are a lot of great writers who would sit down and write pages and pages, and sometimes they look at it at the end of the day and they say, I'll keep this paragraph and the rest of it is garbage. Oh. And my style of writing and what I enjoy about writing is when I feel motivated, then it's something I can really sit down and get into. And if I'm not motivated, my job is to find something to be motivated about and let that build up to the point when I have to get it down on paper. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate being on the program, and I think writing is something that everyone can do and everyone can enjoy. It just has to hit at the right time for different people.
Mm-hmm. And I want to bring up the book that's out now called Fantasy Football for Winners, the kick-ass guide to dominating your league from the world's foremost fantozoologist?
Fantozoologist.
Okay, all right. Did you create that word? Or
I may have, but in fairness, other people may have created it. But I wrote it down as a joke a few years ago, and people enjoyed it, so I decided to make that part of the book. But the first book was something that I was passionate about, and it was a very serious book. And this book, I decided, I just felt the need to, at the one hand, instruct, and on the other hand, make fun of the passion that people have. And I compete, I enjoy it in fantasy sports. And there's something kind of odd about me and millions of other people who will waste hours and hours following a baseball game or a basketball game or football game. That we have no interest in who wins or loses. Our only interest is to see our player do well. A player that we'll never meet, a player who will never know our name, and somehow we feel this kinship with them. And so the premise of the book, the concept, really came about from this idea of how crazy must we be to do this, and can we get that craziness in book form for everyone to see and kind of expose us for who we are.
Well, I'm new to this fantasy football, but I have a friend who's a total fanatic. And I know that you've won a couple of things with fantasy football or something in the past.
Fantasy baseball, 2 online worldwide tournaments out of almost 400,000 people combined. And it was at that point the first time I won, and then the second time was when I was dating my now wife, and realized that there's really a skill to this if you can tap into it. I'm not claiming that I'm a master at it, but that I felt like, well, I've won 2 worldwide contests. There's something there. There's something that can be imparted to other people of how you can succeed in this world. And so that's half the book, and the other half is poking fun at what I'm doing.
Well, it certainly is. It's fascinating, and like I said, I know a few people who are into this fantasy football, and it is amazing what you were saying about the players too. These players get traded so many times during the season. If they even knew how many times they get traded. Well, anyway, where can they find out more about your new book?
On Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores. It's my publisher is a house that the editor is someone who has competed in a lot of these fantasy sports contests himself, and we can get in more into that later if you like, if it makes sense later in the program. But that was something that appealed to me in terms of a publisher. This editor understood how to market and promote this kind of book, and it wasn't just someone looking at it and trying to make sense of it, and that mattered to me when I was looking for a publisher.
Okay, I think what you just said is kind of important. It certainly has to do with the show today. So when you were looking for someone to publish this, you were looking for an editor who was into your genre, is what you're saying.
Exactly. That was some advice that a friend of mine I went to school with who joined the publishing world after college. She said many years ago when I was working on my first book that was something that she felt should matter, is you don't want anyone marketing your book or publishing your book, because if they're not invested in it, and you just showed the numbers earlier, the average book, 99 copies sold, the fact is that sometimes there are going to be some lost leaders in the publishing world. They might publish a book and it may not do as well, and they might realize that at the outset and then move on to the next option, especially if you're dealing with volume. In terms of number of authors that you're dealing with. So if you can find that publishing house that is going to look at your book, appreciate what it is, and want to get it out there, want people to see it, not just from a monetary perspective, but feeling like there is a compelling story here, a compelling angle that needs to be brought, to the public, then that's an example of someone and some entity, a publishing house, that can work on your behalf without you having to ask them to. They're doing it because they want to do it. It's very hard to get someone or get an entity to do that unless they already are going to do it at the outset. And so finding a publishing house that already embraces that concept, it means looking up what else that publisher has published and do those books relate in any way to your theme. do you offer something new with your book that they have not addressed in the books they have already published? And those are the types of hints that you can look into and say, this is the house that's right for me.
Well, BJ, we're going to move on here. We're going to ask Dana to give us a little bit about her background. Dana Michelli was with Writers in the Sky. Dana, can you give our listeners, you've been on the show several times, but we still need to let the listeners know who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Writers in the Sky is a company that kind of wears a lot of hats. We do editing and marketing for books and academic assistance, you name it. So I take whatever comes, and it's a lot of fun, and there's always something new to do. And my background is I went to law school, and I wasn't into the whole practicing thing. So I returned to my original love, which is writing and editing, and it's been wonderful ever since.
All right. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, here on KLAV 1230 on the AM dial and on the computer at www.klav1230am.com. You can view us live at youtube.com/Aspects of Writing. Just click on the featured button. My guest is Dana Michelli, BJ Rudell, and Janet Corsi is here in the studio with me. We're going to get into the topic of the day, which is finding your editor, and please, anyone who has a comment to make, please do so. Once you have written a manuscript, your journey has just begun. Now it is up to you to find a book editor who can help turn your draft into a piece of art without completely destroying your work at the same time. Choosing the best editor is never easy, simply because book editing isn't easy. Any comments on that so far?
Well, I feel very fortunate to have found you through a mutual friend of both of us,
Yes.
who's written a book, and that's how I found Dana, because I had looked online, and there's hundreds of editors, but they just don't have. They have more red flags, I think, than writers do. Some of them,
Yeah.
And when you try to contact them and they don't get back to you, or you send them something and then they just send back, say, "I'm not interested," without they haven't read what you've written. So definitely getting somebody else who knows somebody is extremely helpful.
And I think that's part of the problem when it comes to editing is knowing who to go to. Dana, I just basically found you through YouTube because Yvonne actually responded to a comment that someone had made from the show. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was just
Pure luck.
finding Dana.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. Yeah, that's really wonderful. Yeah, because somebody on your show had contacted her about being on the show.
Yeah, it was.
And she wasn't unable to do it, so she asked me to do it, and I was like, "It's great."
The young man who used to do this social networking for me, which both you and Jan can attest, I don't do any social networking anymore. But he did that for me, and he was the one. He didn't even tell me. I guess Yvonne had made a comment or something, I'm not sure how that worked, on a YouTube clip. And then he responded to that, invited her to be on the show, and then I think she forwarded that on to you.
Yes.
And then I did contact you.
Yes. It was just a wonderful piece of luck. I mean,
Yeah.
because I don't typically do radio shows, so it just kind of fell in my lap, and it's just been great. But I do agree with what Jan's saying. You have to get references. I mean, it's been a little easier for people, I think, for people contacting me because Writers in the Sky, like they're going to a real website. It's a company. There's pictures of all of us on there. You know what I mean? And still I get emails sometimes like, "Are you a real person?" And I get it. I totally understand why it's so difficult to trust someone over the internet or even on the telephone. You don't know who you're speaking with and what they're going to do. And references are huge, to ask someone, "What have you done before? Can I see samples?" And going back to what BJ was saying, like, especially with a topic like fantasy sports, if you don't know about it, I mean, there's just going to be a whole host of things that people would miss, nuances about that, I would think.
Well, we're going to move on here, and we're actually going to talk about what you just said. Jan, would you like to read the first one? Get a referral?
Getting a personal recommendation from a trusted author is usually the best way to go. But even in those instances, you may find one author's choice may not be your best choice, especially if you're a writer in a different genre. Also, personalities come into play, and sometimes the fit just isn't right. Personalities aside, an editor that doesn't answer your emails, ignores your specific questions, or pushes you to hire her should set off a red flag. And that's what I was telling James earlier. When I call you, you answer. When I email you, you answer. So this has been wonderful for me.
Yeah. And a little bit of what we were talking about here is what I think, BJ, you had a comment earlier that was in regard to this as well, about getting referrals.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the idea of, I like the idea of the editor. If the editor isn't responding to you or isn't interested, there's no reason to waste your time, obviously, and you deserve better than that. And it's a sign that, if someone's not going to be that, not going to have that follow through, and how do you expect them to have follow through to actually read your work carefully? So you need to find someone who's going to actually take the time.
The hardest thing, I think, even with a referral, is finding someone whose editing skills border what you're doing. I mean, because, like, if you're doing a memoir, that's one form of editing. If you're doing a self-help book, that's another form of editing. When you're doing a fiction like what Jan's book is about, that's another. So it's kind of hard to know who to go to. What advice would either one of you give, Dana or BJ, when it comes to trying to narrow it down?
My experience.
I would.
You go ahead.
Go ahead. I would say that ask the person for samples that fit your genre. If they're a good editor, I mean, I'm not. It's a hard question because there's always a first time for everything, and there was a first time that someone said to me, "Can you edit my, inspirational nonfiction book?" And I had to grow with the task. I mean, there's a first time for everything, but on the author's end, they should really ask for a sample that pertains to what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And BJ, you were going to say?
I'll say that when it comes to content and editing for content, and really what I mean by that is in terms of the story or in terms of the structure and adding meat to the bones of the story, then yes, finding someone who understands that genre is critical. I think on the flip side, you might even find that someone who may not know anything about, I've found this, someone who doesn't know anything about the genre, like my wife was a terrific editor. She's a fantastic writer. And I turned to her as a principal editor for my second book, simply because I trusted her implicitly. She knows nothing about fantasy sports, but she knows a lot about making a compelling case for a concept, for an idea, and she's an amazing editor. And so where I went to my publisher to help with the actual content and structure, I looked to her to make sure that it was as clean and professional looking a manuscript as possible.
I one of the things I do, and mine are basically when I help someone with anything I'm doing, it's always someone I know. So, or someone that knows me and they've introduced me to a friend or whatever. So it's, I don't have a website that I sell editing to. But one of the things I find that works for me, and maybe someone could do this, I always offer them a chapter. I will do a chapter for them and then hand it to them to read and get back with me to see if that's what they're looking for. It works for me because if I don't want to waste my time or theirs. So if it's something that fits what they're trying to accomplish, then we're both in good shape there. I don't know how that would work because I don't do that for a living necessarily. Dana, what's your comments on that?
I've done that many times.
Okay.
I'd send them a chapter, and they can get a feel for what I do. And sometimes, if it's a sample that I've done in the past and it's a whole lot of red marks, I make it very clear the level of editing was particular to that particular job. It doesn't mean that I'm going to tear apart your work, and I make it very clear that I don't touch content unless they want me to. I will make a suggestion in the margin. Hey, you might want to think about this, but I would never alter the course of a story or the content because I think that's wrong, just unethical. So, unless they ask me to do that, I won't.
Right. Okay, BJ, you've done editing in the past as well. I know you said your wife has. How do you feel about that?
I think similar to what Dan said, I think you want to set expectations at the outset, and what kind of editing do you want to see in this chapter or in this book? so that they you're not surprising them at the end. You're not wasting time, because if you're to be an editor, it really takes time to go through something and vet it, whether it's content or grammar, and you want to make sure that you are meeting the expectations of the person who has requested this of you and not insulting them, and also not just letting them skate by with a partial edit where then they say, oh, great, it's perfect, and you say, well, no, I was just editing for this. So you just want to make sure it's very clear up front. And I've been on the flip side where, for my first book, I asked a friend who's a terrific editor, worked as a magazine editor, and I said, can you review this? And I thought it was basically a finished product, and I told her, I said, do whatever you want with it. And she had a lot of content edit, but also grammar edit, nearly on every page of a 300-page manuscript. And I had thought it was pretty much ready to go to find a publisher with. So really, I think if you're willing to open yourself up to the idea that your manuscript needs work, and it's just a matter of what kind of work, then I would say finding that editor and asking that editor to be as upfront as possible and honest as possible. It's better to have that happen on the front end than when you're trying to find a publisher.
Mm-hmm. Well, number 2 is look for testimonials and ask for references. If you have no means of getting a personal recommendation, you can post online discussion boards or put out a call on your social networks and that you're looking to hire an editorial assistant. When you have some candidates, look for the testimonials on their sites, then ask any editor you're considering for a new reference. And I know on Writers in the Sky, you do have a place, I believe, Dana, where you can go for references?
There might be something there on the website. I know there's like a list of clients. I've had people email me directly for references. Mm-hmm. And, they're not on the website per se, but I just, I give them people that they can contact and check it out. And then in addition to the samples, I mean, it's surprising the amount of people that just send me their manuscript, and I always cringe, like, what if I mean, how do you know who I am? But there's a lot of trusting people out there, but there have been a few that have asked for references, and I'm always happy to give them,
Mm-hmm.
Because it also makes me aware that it's a savvy client also, mm-hmm. which is great,
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things, one of the pieces of advice here, and by the way, this is all through C.S. Lakin, who made all these suggestions. Some literary agents offer a list of recommended editors, such as a list of agent through a Rachel Gardner site. If you know any agents or editors or have the opportunity to speak with them at a writers' conference, then they can offer reference to you, someone they may have worked with or can recommend. And speaking of writer conferences, what better place to chat with lots of authors and ask them for an editor recommendation? I actually know a lot of people who go to writers' conferences, and they really get a lot of services there. So that might be one of the best ways to go about this as well. Dana or BJ, have you ever offered your services through any of these type avenues? Dana?
I have not. I offer editing services through word of mouth and through friends and friends of friends, and it's something I enjoy doing. But it's never been on any kind of public domain.
Okay. And Dana, you stay busy enough, I imagine, that you wouldn't really have to go to the writers' conferences to try and start business.
Well, I am busy, but I mean, I haven't. I guess I've been so busy I haven't gotten a chance to do it. I wouldn't rule it out. Mm-hmm. I actually know an agent who that's how she finds all of her authors, and she does no editors. I'm not doing work for her, but I just happen to know that she's completely offline, and she only deals with people at writers' conferences and recommends editors that way. And so I believe it's probably very useful. I just haven't had a chance to get to one yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you are listening. You are listening to Aspects of Writing here on KLEV at 12:30 a.m. on the dial, and on your computer you can go to www.klev1230am.com. My guest is Dana Michelli and BJ Rudell, and then Janet Corsi is here in the studio with me. And Janet's going to take number 4 for us to give us some more advice.
Go through an established and reputable editing organization. Etc. in Berkeley, California is one example of a group of very proficient and experienced editors that not only teach online and on-site workshops on editing, they also have a pool of editors whom have gone through rigorous testing and application to become approved as their editors for hire. Some companies allow you to specifically choose the editor you want to work with, others do not. So be sure to read up on what they offer and how their services work.
Okay. We're going to skip ahead here a little bit. Well, I would like to ask, when it comes to professional editing, Dana, you didn't necessarily go to school to become an editor because you said you were an attorney. It's just a skill that you basically have picked up. Is that correct?
Well, it's just something. I've always loved books. I read from a very early age. I was always obsessed with it, and I was an English major in college. And then, going to law school, lawyers, everybody knows, are very anal and meticulous and, attention to detail. And so I kind of honed those skills in law school. So it was, the English degree was the creative part of it, and the law school was the, very, attention to detail and kind of being a grammar Nazi and all that sort of stuff.
Well, BJ, what do you think makes a good editor?
I think someone who is diligent, someone who's willing to look at something as a big picture and something as in the weeds. And if you get a chance to talk with an editor, if there's someone who you want to hire and you get a chance to meet with that person, really, I want to know, are they the type of person who takes special care in themselves and how they present themselves? Because if they do, I think they're more likely to be diligent in all walks of life. And if someone just appears sloppy, or if someone emails you back and there's a typo in the email, it sounds silly and small, but really it's almost like interviewing someone for a job. And I think finding that editor that really takes the time and aims for perfection, that's really someone you want in your corner.
Mm-hmm. Well, some editors charge by the hours, while others charge either by the page or word. I would opt for editors who charge by the hour, and here's why. And this is what Ms. Lankin is saying. When an editor sets a rate per page or word, they're usually figuring an average reading regarding the time that they will spend editing a page or a certain number of words. That means if you are a proficient writer and self-edit your material well, you get charged the same as a sloppy or inexperienced writer who may require a complete rewrite of every sentence. The flip side of this, of course, is if you are truly inexperienced and feel your book is a train wreck and an editor is willing to do mass reworking of your material for a reasonable price. In that case, paying by the word or page may be a great deal for you. Dana, how do you? I know you charge basically by the page, I believe.
Mm-hmm, usually. Mm-hmm.
But it can vary, though.
Yeah, I mean, it is on a case by case basis. But I have to admit, I prefer the per page only because I feel like the client knows from the get go what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. So I just feel more comfortable with that. Maybe somebody else is comfortable with the hourly thing. I have charged people by the hour, but that's because I've offered them both options, and that's what they prefer.
Okay.
And sometimes I do wind up taking on a job that is not cost effective for me. But I just feel like, especially when it's a new client, mm-hmm. I just feel like it's more comfortable for them to know this is what it is. They've usually sent me the manuscript by that point, mm-hmm. or at least a part of it, so I get a sense of what I'm looking at. And I felt like it just makes for a more comfortable relationship, especially being that they don't know me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know when it comes to Jan's book, she's so happy with what you've done so far. She's already talking about the second book. I mean, so I suppose in some ways, even if it's not cost effective for the first round, because literally every author learns every time something's edited for them.
Sure. I
certainly have. So by the time you get the second book, at least she will have kind of averaged it out for you.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not even, I really enjoy building relationships with people.
Yeah. So
that's kind of like what I like the most about the work, or a large part of it. So, yeah, I mean, I don't, I'm going into it making that quote. And if they, if they accept it, fine. If they don't, they don't. But the hourly thing, it's also I think it's particular, I don't know how BJ feels about this, but it's also particular to the way someone works. I might work, it depends on my mood. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I need to step away from it. I find it very cumbersome to sit there and document my time to that degree.
Right, and I can attest to that as well. I've been working on something myself recently for someone, and I've spent 2 days sitting in front of that computer from the time I get up in the morning, maybe taking time to go get something to eat or whatever, and then coming back, and I go to bed with that on my mind. But after 2 days of that, I have to walk away because it's too much. So I like being able to walk away and come back, and then when I feel more in the mood of doing it. It's almost like being creative as an author. When you're an author and you're writing, or at least this is the way it is for me, when I'm writing, I don't sit down and just start writing from beginning to end and write the whole thing out. I mean, it may take me a year to write something because I'll work on something, put it away, and go back to it later.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you can't do that in editing. You can't take that long, but you know what
Right.
is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. I mean, I work from my home, and I could be sitting somewhere, and either I'm distracted or the phone rings, or there's some pressing issue from another client, and sometimes I'm jumping around, to different things, and or today I put everything down to go vote. You know what I mean? So.
Right.
It's just very difficult to document this is not something I'm comfortable with, and I felt that way when I was in school and then working for attorneys. Like, I don't know, maybe that's just a baggage from the lawyer world. I don't know.
Well, BJ, what advice can you offer a new author looking for an editor?
I talk to Dana.
Well, that's good for Dana.
Very good.
Dana, what would advice? Go
If I
ahead.
can have one more thing, I'm sorry. And I mean, Dana's very accomplished. I think find someone that you, and Janet's clearly found this, someone you can trust.
Right.
Yes.
And I think the more people you can reach out to, put a note on Facebook. Say, does anyone out there know a good editor? Do a tweet. Talk to some friends who might be in the writing industry or might have experienced that. Because the farther you branch out and look, the more likely you are to find the right person for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Dana, the same question?
Yeah, I would say definitely. It's so the internet is complicated things. In some ways, it's wonderful, and in some ways, it's just complicated. I get people that say, "Listen, I need someone in Nashville, where Writers in the Sky is. I want to see the person face to face." I get it, I think it's establishing that trust and making sure that the person's honest, and that you just know what you're going to get for your money.
Mm-hmm. Well, BJ, you have 2 books out, and your experience with hiring an editor. You were saying your wife has helped you in the past. Did the publisher assign anyone at all with the last book you did?
Yes. In both instances, the publisher had someone edit the book from top to bottom.
Okay.
I have to say that with one experience, the editing was nearly flawless. With the other experience, it was adequate.
Okay.
And so I felt, because I'm a little bit of a control freak, I felt fortunate that I had some support on the side. And so I had about 5 sets of eyes, including my own, and including the publisher's editor, but usually 3 other sets of eyes going through the whole manuscript. Very nice of these people to do this for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a case where, and others, people who are listening right now might find that they have a publisher, and, although publishers know what they're doing and they have terrific editors, no one is perfect. And so my first book, there's a typo. It's not a terrible typo. It's the wrong year. It should be 1992 instead of 1988. It's a long story. But basically, I hate the fact that on page 2, that little error is there.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody caught it. And it took a coworker of mine 4 years after it was published who decided to read it to say, hey, shouldn't it be 1992? And
4 years
it
later,
yeah, and it just goes to show that it just one reader might find something, or a bunch of readers might find something that 5 quote unquote editors don't find, and so you really want to make sure that you've got as many sets of eyes as possible.
Well, speaking of that, I find it interesting what people do pick up on and what they don't. I self-published my first book, and I went through, I think, 3 or 4 editors. And even going through that many editors, grammatically, some of what I had was not correct when the book was finished. and there were quite a few errors in that book. And I remember people who know me would call me and say, on page 26, did you mean A or an? All right, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not too bad. And then someone else would come in. On page 17, did you mean this or that? And, but the interesting thing is no one picks up on the same thing. That's what was odd, is that, you can read a book.
Right.
And there could be dozens of errors in there, but they're only going to see a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because of the way we read.
Writer.
Yeah.
You're right. We gloss over certain things and we catch other things, and we can read over the same thing 10 times and still miss it.
Well, because in our mind, we've already read it that way, so we don't see it any other way. That's the problem with the actual writer themselves.
Right.
That's right.
It's so painful when you hear about that error. I can't. It drives me crazy. I can't imagine. I mean, well, I can't imagine because it's happened to everyone, but it's maddening. I mean, BJ, you're so lucky that you and your wife have such a good working relationship because. Just a side note, my father wrote a book, and my mother and I helped him with the editing, and it was like World War III in my house.
Well, go ahead, Dana.
My father is just this usually very logical, very open person became this control freak. He became like this other person. I mean, I love him dearly. He knows. I mean, I've said it to him a million times, but he's gotten a lot better. So there's room for growth. Let's put it that way. But it is hard to find those mistakes, especially when it's somebody else just tells you, like right. DJ's coworker. It's just an awful feeling.
Yeah. Well, I certainly have experienced that with both books I've had. So we're going to move on real quick. I'm going to read the last few things here from dummies.com. The first one is read acknowledgement pages of books similar to yours. Authors often acknowledge their editor's contribution, and that's actually very important, if you're looking for a source. Scour press coverages of books you admire for the editor's name. Go to writers' conferences or conventions and network. And then 4 is call the company that published a book similar to yours and ask who the editor was. But the problem with that is if they have an on-staff editor, they're probably not going to give that person out, I would imagine. Is that correct? BJ or Dana?
I guess it depends if they're a freelancer, right? I really don't know.
Yeah, I had a friend who worked for a publishing house in New York, and I know that he worked directly for the publishing company, and I guess he wasn't allowed to take outside work, probably because they kept him so busy with their own. So I know in some cases that is true, that even if you were to call a major publishing house, they probably wouldn't refer you to one of their editors. So... does anyone have anything else to say or add when it comes to the editing process? Dana, BJ, Jan?
Just loving my job. Always love being on the show. I always learn something, so thank you.
Well, we love having you on the show. We really do.
And anybody who writes a book who thinks you do not need an editor, you are so wrong. So wrong.
That is true. That's probably the one expense you cannot forego is the editor. You need that editor. So.
And I don't take it personally. I think of this as a growing experience, and so it's, for me, it's just wonderful. So don't worry about it.
That's why you're my dream client. That's why.
Can I get a discount on the next book?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we're here for the last minutes of the show. I would like to thank Dana Michelli and author B.J. Rudell for being on today's show. To find out more about my guest, please visit the links page on the website, my website, aspectsofwriting.com. Aspects of Writing broadcasts live every Tuesday at 2 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on KLAV 1230 on the AM dial, or you can listen on the computer at www.klav1230am.com. This show rebroadcast every Wednesday, 8 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time on VegasAllNetRadio.com. Our past shows are also archived on VegasAllNetRadio.com. Just go to the archive, our page, Aspect of Writing, and go to the bottom of the page, and there are all the archives. To view the recorded visual version of this show, go to youtube.com/Aspects of Writing on your computer. This show will be posted immediately after this broadcast. For future lineups, log on to www.aspectsofwriting.com. So until next time, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Dana and BJ, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Jan?
Bye, y'all.
Thanks again.
Check your email, James.
You can follow Nebraska football on Kelly V throughout the season. On game days, join me very about 1 hour before the kickoff for the Cornhusker Countdown Show as co-hosts John Bishop and Al Neckwitz check in from Nebraska to give our listeners an exclusive 30-minute program that features news and views on the Huskers plus an overview of what they've done. Following Cornhusker Countdown, stay tuned as we join the Husker Sports Network for more pre-game programming and the play-by-play broadcast of the game. Make KLAD your Husker headquarters, Radio 1230, your station for Nebraska football.
Hi, this is Joe Johnson. I'm the host of the Joe the AC Guy Show. I've worked in the air conditioning and heating industry for the past 20 years. I'm also the owner and founder of Las Vegas' most highly reputable HVAC companies, Rebel Refrigeration and Air Conditioning. Every Wednesday at 9 a.m., I've got the answers to help you make informed decisions regarding all aspects of your heating and cooling needs. We'll also have special guests for other family and entertainment topics, so be sure to tune in every Wednesday at 9 a.m. for the Joe the AC Guy Show. Let's keep Las Vegas cool. I'm not afraid. There's so many ways to get that place.
Turn off.